people develop these symptoms like joint aches or rashes, things like that. They go see the doctor. The doc says, okay, you've got these antibodies, or maybe you don't have any antibodies at all, in which case you don't qualify. You don't have the disease. Come back in a year.
Yeah, come back when you're sicker.
Yeah, come back when you're sicker, and we'll do the test, and we'll see if you got the antibodies.
Yeah, when you meet the criteria, we don't care how you feel, but when you meet the criteria, then we can give you a drug. So, Bob, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Hi, Mark. Great to be here.
Listen, we've known each other for better part of three decades.
Yeah.
You were this kind of iconic figure when I first met you in my mind. This guy who got up on stage and unraveled the mysteries of human biology in ways that just left me in awe and left me rolling on the floor laughing. And hopefully we'll do both of those today. And I think, the topic today is one that is affecting more people than almost any other health condition, probably except metabolic syndrome and prediabetes and the whole phenomena of poor metabolic health. And it's autoimmune disease.
Yes.
And if you look at it collectively, autoimmune disease affects more people than cancer, heart disease, and diabetes combined. It's over 80 million Americans who have some form or another, serious or less serious, and it's gone crazy. I mean, when you look at the data from 100 years ago, we didn't have these autoimmune diseases. I've been traveling out to remote areas in the jungles in Ecuador, to remote areas where people live in traditional ways, and they don't have autoimmune disease. They don't have allergy.
Right.
And so something's kind of gone wacky. And, as part of a company that I co-founded, Function Health, we've been tracking people's data. We've done over 3 million data points on over 25,000 people. And we're looking at the biomarkers that pop up that are, abnormal. And 30%, and this is a health-forward population, 30% of the people who test at Function Health have a positive ANA, which is staggering to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 1/3 of people are walking around with either some form of autoimmunity or pre-autoimmunity.
Yep.
And, it's affecting so many of us in so many ways. I've had autoimmune diseases. I've had positive antibodies. I've had ulcerative colitis. I've had all kinds of inflammatory syndromes, and I've had to learn about it from the inside out. And I've been able to heal myself by using the model of functional medicine. And I think, you've been really one of the key thought leaders, thinkers, kind of concoctors of the model, and in fact you lead the
concoction. Yes.
Yeah, the immune module at the Institute for Functional Medicine, which trains doctors on how to think about this. But why are we seeing so much of a rise in autoimmune conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, colitis, Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's? Why are these on the rise? Why are we seeing this whole phenomena of this disease where the body's attacking itself?
Well, you have to start with where we were 100 years ago. There was a Dr. Paul Ehrlich, who's considered the founder of modern immunology, right? And Dr. Ehrlich said, autoimmune disease is incompatible with life. You cannot have it. And if you did have it...
That's not true.
and if you did have it, you would call it the horror autotoxicus.
Horror autotoxicus. Sounds like a lot of people's life with autoimmune disease.
Horror autotoxicus, because if the body's immune system attacked itself, everything would fall apart and you would die. Yeah. Right? And Dr. Ehrlich was a big head honcho. No one disagreed with him. And so he said, it doesn't exist. And everyone looked the other way. Yeah. Even though they knew for a long time about anti-nuclear antibodies. Yeah. For example.
That's the positive test that I was talking about. That's 30% of the population we're testing. 30% of the
population. So it wasn't until around the 1940s or 50s that it began to be acknowledged that autoimmune disease exists. Right? So we start from, it doesn't exist at all.
The crazy.
To, okay, maybe a few people have. Yeah. There's autoimmune.
But it wasn't that prevalent back then.
It didn't seem to be. Didn't seem to be that prevalent. We weren't checking for it the same way we're checking for it now. Right? So part of it could be that we didn't believe it, we weren't looking for it, and so now we have ways to look for it. We can investigate. So that might be part of it. But then the feedback you might get around that is, well, isn't that the same with autism? Yeah. Right? Do we really have more autism now, or are we just better at looking for it? I think there's more to it. And I think the more to it, which has actually gotten to the point now where the latest stuff that the researchers are saying is that maybe we all get autoimmune disease.
That this all of us have some degree
we all get it to some degree.
So aging is sort of an autoimmune condition?
Aging is kind of an autoimmune condition, right? Because anti-nuclear antibody levels, the titers, go up.
Yeah.
With aging. What are anti-nuclear antibodies? They're antibodies against the nucleus of the cell which could be any material in the cell, against the DNA
Yeah.
or the proteins that wrap around the DNA, right? Why would we add that?
Yeah.
Right? Something's got to be damaging the cells so that the cellular contents, specifically the nuclear contents, are getting out into the bloodstream. And then the immune system sees that and starts making antibodies. Now, our friends Aristo Vajdaani and Datis Karazian, they've done some very interesting studies on antibodies against toxins.
Toxins, like
Right.
mold
Right.
toxins.
They go to people that live in a manufactured home facility, right, where there's a lot of, formaldehyde and other kind of chemicals there, and they measure antibodies against the common materials that are found in those homes, and all these people are making antibodies.
Yeah.
So, we start with this observation that there's antibodies against nuclear material. What else are there antibodies against?
Yeah.
All kinds of things. And why do we make antibodies?
Yeah.
Because something is perturbing the immune system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. What you're really talking about is this phenomena where the body is attacking itself.
Yes.
And there's got to be some trigger. But in traditional medicine, we're just really good at describing the symptoms and the pathology.
Who cares about the trigger?
You have psoriatic arthritis.
Yeah.
You have rheumatoid arthritis. It means you meet these diagnostic criteria that are set up by the
American
governing
College
bodies.
of Rheumatology,
Right.
something like
By all
that.
the
right?
academies that sort of on high that say, okay, if you have this disease.
Right. Lupus, you've got these 5 criteria. You got to
Exactly.
meet those 5 criteria.
And so, but it doesn't tell you anything about the why.
No.
And functional medicine is all about the why.
Right.
Why do you have this problem? Why is the body attacking itself? And so they really, have a very archaic way, in my view, very almost frightening way of dealing with these diseases, which is using very powerful drugs.
Yep.
Things like prednisone, immune suppressants, TNF-alpha blockers, things that tend to have serious side effects. And they can be life-saving, and they can help people relieve suffering, and they can relieve pain, and they're not a problem to use in every case. But what I'm suggesting is that they're missing the point. One of our mentors, Sidney Baker, always said that we should pay attention to what we call the TAC rules of medicine.
Yeah.
Standing on the TAC, it takes a lot of aspirin to feel better.
Yeah.
If you're eating gluten and that's causing your autoimmune disease, it takes a lot of prednisone to suppress that immune response. Why wouldn't you just get rid of the gluten in the first place?
Right.
So I'd love you to sort of unpack how in functional medicine we begin to think about the root causes, because, and maybe I even shouldn't say functional medicine, because if you look at the scientific literature,
It's all there.
it's all there. Like when you just talked about with the immune system, right?
Yep.
There's a whole series of chemicals that our body is causing an autoimmune response to. And this is a phenomenon called immunotoxicity.
Yes.
And it happens at very, very low levels of these chemicals that are ubiquitous forever chemicals that we're exposed to, whether it's plastic, phthalates, petrochemicals, pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals. Pharmaceuticals. Okay, we'll get into that. Yeah, I know there's some pharmaceuticals that cause autoimmunity, but this is stuff that we don't really pay attention to in traditional medicine, yet the science is all there. So can you just sort of, at a high level breakdown, what are the top causes of things that make our immune system so pissed off? Because that's what's different about functional medicine. It's not like, okay, your immune system's pissed off, let's find the drug to calm it down. It's like, no, we're going to find out why your immune system's pissed off.
So in order to get across the mechanism of this root cause thing, I've got to talk a little bit about the immune system.
Please.
Right? 2 major parts of the immune system that we know: the innate immune system, which is the ancient part. Jellyfish have an innate immune system.
The jellyfish immune system.
The jellyfish immune system, and then the acquired immune system, which is the part that gets activated with exposure to a virus or vaccines or things like that.
Yeah, so you get antibodies against COVID.
You get antibodies, that's from
your more
B
evolved immune
lymphocytes,
system.
that's the evolved immune system. And so if you look through the literature on autoimmune disease, it's all about the acquired immune system. The drugs that were developed to treat autoimmune disease are all drugs targeted at T lymphocytes or B lymphocytes.
So they're all working on only one part of the immune system.
Only one part of the immune system. And so the assumption, or when you start thinking that way, is that there's aberrant functioning, right? Aberrant, what does that mean, right? It means that you're walking down the street and one day rheumatoid arthritis falls out of the sky and hits your T lymphocytes or your B lymphocytes, and you start making antibodies against rheumatoid factor, right?
Correct.
So IgM against IgG. And so that kind of sets you up, right, for this lifelong problem. And the sort of joke that I tell is that people develop these symptoms like joint aches or rashes, things like that, They go see the doctor. The doc says, okay, you've got these antibodies, or maybe you don't have any antibodies at all, in which case you don't qualify. You don't have the disease. Come back in a year.
Yeah, come back when you're sicker.
Yeah, come back when you're sicker, and we'll do the test, and we'll see if you got the antibodies.
Yeah, when you meet the criteria, we don't care how you feel, but when you meet the criteria, then we give you a drug.
Then we give you the drug, and you've made the team. You've made the team rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
You've made the team multiple sclerosis. You've made the team Hashimoto's.
Yeah.
Right? But what they don't tell you is that the jersey for the team is welded to your back for life.
Yeah.
Because now you've got it, you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
So that's all based on the premise that this is an acquired immune system dysfunction that has mysterious origins. We don't know why. Maybe something in the environment, maybe a virus like Epstein-Barr virus triggered this, right? But that's all out in the distant sort of misty past, right? The disty past, right? So who cares about what the triggers might be?
Yeah.
But if you bring in the innate immune system and you begin to realize that the innate immune system actually programs the acquired immune system, right? So everything that the T lymphocytes are doing, that B lymphocytes are doing, they're doing it because antigen-presenting cells like dendritic cells, macrophages, etc., sampled something from the environment, displayed it to a naive lymphocyte, and programmed it to go down a particular pathway.
Yeah.
And why the heck do we get into all that physiology? Why does it matter?
Yeah, why did you just confuse the heck out of
Why
me?
did I just confuse the heck out of you? Because that innate immune system, that's the part that is sensing the external world.
Yeah.
Right? That's what's in touch with what you eat.
Yeah.
That's what's in touch with what you breathe.
It's the first line of defense. It's sort of it's the undifferentiated response to bad stuff.
To bad stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit and say, what's the number one risk factor for getting rheumatoid arthritis? Cigarette smoking.
Interesting.
Right? So you might think, oh, it's leaky gut, or it's gluten or something like that. But actually, the best research risk factor for RA is smoking. And number two to that is air pollution.
Interesting.
So maybe rheumatoid arthritis starts in the lungs. Right? So that opens up.
The knee bone's connected to the shin bone.
Everything is connected in a very mysterious systems biology kind of way, which is what functional medicine is, applied systems biology.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So if you start thinking that way, then you want to ask the question, well, what happened to the lungs exactly? And now we know what is going on, is that inflammation in the lungs caused by the cigarette smoke or free radicals, right, activate certain enzymes. And these enzymes are called the PAD enzymes, the PAD enzymes, right? Peptidyl arginine deaminases.
Everybody
Why
has a quiz
does that
on
matter?
that.
Everybody write that down, because the drug companies are making drugs right now to inhibit this. So rather than saying, well, maybe you shouldn't smoke, or maybe you should get a good air filter, instead they're saying, here's a drug you could take that would turn off the enzyme that stopped the process that led to all these things downstream. So here's the deal. The cigarette smoke causes inflammation, activates those enzymes. The enzymes cause a change in the molecular structure of the proteins that line the lung. So sticking out of those proteins is an amino acid we've all heard of called arginine. The enzyme cuts off the arginine and puts on an amino acid called citrulline. And that changes the whole structure. This changes everything. Right? Suddenly it's a freak molecule. Right? There's nothing wrong with citrulline.
It looks foreign.
Looks foreign. Right?
Yeah.
This is something that the immune system doesn't recognize, so it goes, wait a minute, this is a stranger, and I think it's a dangerous stranger. That's what the immune system is looking
Stranger
for.
danger.
It's stranger danger. Stranger
That's
danger.
what autoimmune disease
So
is.
that's what autoimmune disease is these innate immune cells get this signal, stranger danger, and then they go to the naive lymphocytes that are not programmed and say, you guys better watch out. There's a war coming. The bad guys are here.
Now, the way in which I think about this is that, that's the underlying immunology that happens, which is important to understand if you want to kind of figure out how to work with it and play with it with food, with nutrients, with various compounds, various interventions that we use. But I just kind of want to back up a little bit more, because you mentioned a few things. One, you mentioned air pollution. You mentioned smoking. These are causative factors that are modifiable.
And are changing in our society in parallel with the rise in all kinds of diseases, not just autoimmune diseases.
Right. So immunotoxicity is a big category.
Yeah.
What's environmental toxins is a big trigger of autoimmune disease, and I see this all the time. I remember I actually had a case of a guy who had ulcerative colitis years ago, and I tried all the normal functional medicine stuff, fixed his gut, 5-hour program, elimination diet, the whole thing, all my best tricks. Didn't get better. Was losing weight, it's really sick. I was getting about needing to be on some serious drugs. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to remember what Sid said, and have I forgot anything about this patient? Is there something I missed? Is there something I didn't think of? How do I think
something to avoid or something to get?
Yeah, is there something he needs to get rid of that's bothering him, or something he needs to get better? And it turned out he had extremely high levels of mercury.
Oh, yeah.
And we did a heavy metal chelation protocol with him. We got rid of all the mercury. His gut completely normalized, and he's completely fine years later. And so that kind of made it really clear to me that toxins were a big factor.
Yep.
What else are the big factors that are the causative factors for autoimmune disease?
Okay, so heavy metals, definitely up there. One that people don't think about a lot is arsenic, right? Arsenic is definitely implicated in autoimmune diseases. There's certain countries and certain parts of the United States where arsenic levels in the water supply are pretty elevated. And, we could spend an hour or two talking about all the mechanisms by which that happens. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that arsenic is really widespread. They used to put it in the wood in picnic tables.
Picnic tables, your deck, and your pressure-treated lumber.
Then it rains, and you go and you lay on your deck afterwards when it's still wet, and the arsenic is absorbed through your skin, right? And again, arsenic can cause
and wine, because all the pressure-treated lumber post that the wine grapevines are into, and that goes to the soil, and the grapes are contaminated. So wine is actually red wine source of
watch where you're getting that from, right? Exactly. And so it's like green wood. When you see wood with a greenish tint to it, that's when you need to worry about it.
So toxins, okay,
heavy metals, arsenic, cadmium, lead still with us, still a problem. And there are a lot of mechanisms by which that can happen. The metals can cause free radicals, which is oxygen rusting, basically, oxygen damaging molecules. But they can also bind to enzymes. They can bind to molecular compounds and cause freak molecules. So that all leads to what's called break intolerance. Tolerance is the state of normalcy for the immune system.
You're able to you're able to detect friend from foe and not react to everything in your environment. Like people have allergies to pollen. Well, they shouldn't, or cat dander, they shouldn't. They're overreacting to something in the environment that's harmless. But their immune system's lost tolerance for that. Or food, right?
And that tolerance, an important thing to understand about tolerance is that it's an active process. It's not a passive process. So our immune cells don't just ignore what's there. They're paying attention, but they're this is anthropomorphic. They're actually choosing not to react. And there's a lot that goes on inside of the cell that keeps that happening, right? And part of it is the balance of the free radicals, what's called the redox potential inside the cells. That's got to be in perfect balance, or these dendritic cells that we talked about, the
immune sensing cells.
The immune sensing cells will start getting out of whack and start reacting in a very aberrant way.
So it's an abnormal reaction to a normal thing. It's essentially what is going on. And toxins we think of as poisons that can poison cells and poison various cellular mechanisms in mitochondria, but and it's sort of dose dependent. The more the poison, the worse the effect. But with immunotoxicity, it's not like that. It's very low levels and create a massive reaction. And the explanation I always give for that is this case I had when I was I think I was a medical resident. I was in the ER, and this big loud horn going off in front of the ER doors, and like a car horn wouldn't stop. We all ran out, and there was a young guy slumped across the wheel, face down, and he was basically dead. We dragged him out of the car. We threw him on a stretcher. We ran him into the ER. We paddled him, with the cardiac paddles. We pumped him full of epinephrine, pumped him full of steroids, got him, woke up. Like, what happened? He's like, well, I'm allergic to fish. And I was in my friend's apartment, and he was cooking fish. And I just smelled the molecules in the fish. I didn't eat it. The molecules in the air from cooking the fish across the room. And it triggered an anaphylactic reaction. He could feel it coming on. He knew he wouldn't make it for the ambulance to come. So he got in his car and drove 2 miles to the emergency room. And that taught me that an infinitesimally small amount of an insult can create a massive reaction.
Massive reaction.
It's not just, so the environmental toxins are like that. It's not like you have to have a load of them, and we all, by the way, do, but it's really a huge issue. So besides,
it actually may be the small quantities that are the problem, right?
Yeah.
And that the term for that is hormesis. It's a great term, you know it well, right? And that came from work by a guy named Ed Calabrese, who you probably met or interviewed, who talked about the fact that in higher doses, things may not be very toxic, but especially certain compounds with hormonal-like properties, right, become what's called endocrine disruptors.
Well, these are immune disruptors.
Right. Well, endocrine disruptors and immune disruptors
are the same chemicals.
Yeah, they're very much the same chemicals, but in particular, ones that have an effect that is like estrogen. Right? So who gets most of the autoimmune disease?
Interesting.
80-90% women.
Interesting.
Right? So it turns out the same enzymes that process estrogen in the woman's body also process these which is foreign, xenoestrogens.
Interesting.
So the xenoestrogens are immune toxins and endocrine disruptors at the same time.
So we get it. We get toxins are bad. What else is on the list of things that cause autoimmunity?
Well, I guess you would call them toxins, but microplastics. Microplastics have been found in the stool in higher quantities in people with ulcerative colitis.
And now there's nanoplastics, which are worse than microplastics.
But basically plastics you can't see without a microscope. We don't really understand the mechanism of toxicity of these. I mean, they are toxins, right? But they're doing other things that are irritating that you don't quite understand.
It's scary.
That's a scary thing because they found it in organic foods. Right? Or in bottled water. You find these microplastics. So
I think the nanoplastic data just came out too, and it was even more terrifying because the volumes are much higher, and we're getting exposed to much more of these than we thought, even just drinking a bottle of water. Okay, so toxins.
Toxins.
What besides toxins?
So microbes.
Microbes, bugs.
Right. So you said you have been like all over the jungles of Ecuador, and I'm sure you know about the research that was done in Venezuela. With the tribes that had never contacted the outside world, right? I can't remember the name of the doc, but it was Blazer's wife, I think, was the one that did this research. These anthropologists descend from the sky on this remote jungle tribe and sample their stools.
Paleo poop.
Which I thought, like,
paleo poop.
How on earth did the people that were there, how did they take that, right? When they've never met people from the outside world, and all they're interested in is doing these stool samples, these poop samples, right? So they do these poop samples, and what do they find? Parasites, worms, spirochetes, all the stuff that if we looked in our patient's stool and we found that, we'd say, oh my God, you need to be on a dozen drugs.
You need a parasite cleanse.
You need a cleanse, Olda Clark, you've got, but these people had no autoimmune disease.
And no allergies.
They had no allergy, no autoimmune disease, no heart disease, no asthma.
None of the inflammatory diseases of chronic illness.
Right. They were dying from snake bites, falling out of trees, getting bit by, big lizard, something like that. So they were dying from trauma, but they weren't dying from chronic disease. And so the point is, and this is what Dr. Blazer says in Missing Microbes, is that it's not the presence of something as much as it is the absence of something, right? That there were microbes that were normally there when we were babies, the first year of life. And those microbes send a signal to the dendritic cells again. We're back to the cells that line the gut. They send a signal and say, it's okay to have some foreigners here. It's okay to have strangers here as long as they're not dangerous strangers that are causing injury to the lining of the gut. So there's two parts to this microbe thing. One is the good guys, sort of good guys that are missing, but not even good guys, right? Just they weren't causing a problem.
They call it the epidemic of absence.
The epidemic. There's a whole
book on it.
There's a whole
really
book
good
on
book.
it. Really
it talks about it. It's fascinating.
Epidemic of absence.
And using worms to actually treat autoimmune disease, which is now happening in even conventional medicine.
Big confession. I have given worms to patients with autoimmune diseases and seen beneficial effects. I had a guy with ulcerative colitis. I gave him a certain kind of worm egg.
HDCs?
I got it from Thailand.
Oh, the TH100?
Yeah.
Oh, TH100, yeah.
TSO100.
TSO100,
Yeah, I gave it his ulcerative colitis went away for a year.
That's insane.
He stopped everything. He stopped all of his drugs, everything. He was fine, right? And then it came back.
Did he stop taking it?
Yeah, he stopped taking it, and it came back.
You have to keep taking it.
You have to keep taking it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to keep taking it.
Well, it's almost like we, historically we had an immune system that was used to dealing with all these bugs, worms and parasites, and then we took them all away. They call it the hygiene hypothesis.
Yes.
And all of a sudden the immune system is kind of looking for something to do.
Yes.
And it starts reacting to stuff that it shouldn't react to. And that's when you get allergies and autoimmunity. So I don't think the answer for us all to kind of eat dirt and take worms and,
Well, maybe when you're older, maybe eating dirt's not such a good idea. But, the worm eggs are not, I mean, there's still interesting research. Weinstock is still doing research on that.
Yeah.
What they're asking is, what is it the worms do?
Yeah.
Right? It turns out they secrete a glycoprotein, a protein that's bound to a sugar that's an immune regulator.
Yeah.
It's to their advantage to not get kicked out of the apartment.
Yeah.
They don't want to get evicted.
Yeah.
So they've made these chemicals, and we know what some of them are now, and the chemicals say, okay, I know I'm a foreigner, but just ignore me.
Yeah.
Leave me alone. So that's part of the puzzle.
So gut is a big issue.
Gut is a huge, and lungs, gut and lungs.
So microbes that are mainly not infections, although some infections obviously cause rheumatoid arthritis, like Yersinia or Entamoeba histolytica that's been mapped to causing rheumatoid arthritis in certain subtypes.
Proteus, perhaps, according to Dr. Hebringer.
And there's some, we call it, infectious arthropathies, which we learned about in medical school, like from,
Reiter syndrome, it's called, R-E-I-T-E-R.
And this whole phenomenon, these kind of bugs that aren't necessarily terrible infections, but they do cause autoimmunity, Klebsiella, Yersinia. In functional medicine, we take a look at the whole ecosystem of the gut and we try to optimize it, and that's a key way we treat the issue. But it's not just that there's bad bugs. There's other things that happen, right, that are going on in the gut that drive it. And you talk a lot about the barrier functions.
The barrier.
And the barriers that help us sift through and determine what's friend from foe, right? You have a gut lining that's, arguably the size of a tennis court if you lay it out flat. That is one cell thick.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Huge. And it's one cell.
Visualize your gut like it's a tennis court.
It's big.
And what's going on that tennis court?
And it's only one cell thick. It's like you're basically one cell away from the sewer. And from all these foreign food proteins. So tell us what happens.
One cell away from the sewer.
So tell us what happens when that lining breaks down, why it breaks down, how it breaks down, and what happens, and why that's linked to autoimmune disease.
Robert Frost, the famous physician, said good fences make good neighbors.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea is that certain bugs or chemicals don't cause a problem if they're in the right compartment. Right? So as long as they stay in your gut, it's not an issue. But what would affect that thin lining in such a way that it becomes leaky?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, now we know that there's this mucus layer, and there are a lot of things that go into maintaining a healthy mucus layer. I mean, it's a very complicated material, that mucin. And one of the things that's necessary for maintenance is certain kinds of bacteria. There's one called Akkermansia muciniphila, which I know that's a good friend of yours.
Yeah, it's a good friend of mine.
You guys
I lost him for a while, actually. When I was sick a few years ago, I got ulcerative colitis.
It went away.
And I was like, it was gone. And I had to get him back, and it was a big project. I go looking for him, and hard to find. But I was able to grow him back, actually, by using food, polyphenols.
So there was a really interesting study that was done a few years back where they actually got Mehmet Oz's signature smoothie and measured people's gut flora. And one of the things they measured was Akkermansia. And they went on the Oz Cleanse smoothie.
I think I helped him.
Went way up.
I think I helped him develop that, actually.
You have developed this smoothie, right?
Yeah.
Right. So Akkermansia went through the roof.
Yeah.
But then as soon as he stopped the smoothie, the Akkermansia disappeared.
Yeah.
So we want to maintain Akkermansia because it helps with the turnover of the mucin link.
Yeah.
So that's an important concept because most people just think, well, it's a cellular layer. That's all there is.
But when was the last time you went to the rheumatologist and they checked your toxins or looked for Akkermansia levels?
Or even acknowledge that I had poo? right?
Right.
I mean, if there was something to look at. And
Yeah, your rheumatologist should be doing a stool test, but they don't do that.
No.
It's probably if you're a rheumatologist, it's probably the most important test you can do.
Probably the most important test you could do. To
That, the
see
celiac panel.
what's the mix of there. So the other part of it is that we know that the cells that line the gut have these junctions called tight junctions, right? And when you look at them under a microscope, or especially electron microscope, you realize that it's a very complicated scenario that's going on. You remember, Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah, of course.
Remember the northern wall
Yeah.
to keep the night walkers out? That's a complicated wall, and they had little doors that are going in and out.
Yeah.
Well, if that wall, the lining, if it's completely tight, nothing ever gets in, you don't absorb nutrients.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to open it and close it at will. You imagine these little guys with levers in there opening these levers.
I think it was like a coffee filter, right? Because basically the food and the nutrients are supposed to go through the cells and not in between the cells.
Yes.
And when these tight junctions break down, the food and bacterial toxins and proteins leak in between the cells.
Yes.
And that's what causes the problem. That's called a leaky gut, or
leaky gut.
Intestinal permeability increase, or whatever you want to call it. I think, it's amazing to me that we've been talking about leaky gut, and people used to laugh at us for talking about it. Now it's in the mainstream literature.
It's in all the journals.
And it all came from functional medicine, but they don't even acknowledge that. But now it's all the mainstream journal.
I heard about it from Leo Gallen 40 years ago, right? And again, the mainstream docs, the gastroenterologists, will say, leaky gut, what kind of problem is that? What a joke.
Yeah, right.
Right? And now we've got electron microscopy that shows what's going on. We know about claudins and occludins and all the different proteins involved. And then along comes Alessio.
Yeah,
right?
Dr. Fasano. We've had him on the podcast.
Yeah, Alessio Fasano, who had the gall to actually study the mechanism involved in this. And he tells a great story about it. It was all about cholera, right?
Cholera, yeah.
It was trying to figure out what caused that intense diarrhea you would get with cholera, and discovered this protein called zonulin.
Yeah.
Right? And zonulin changed everything, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. It basically is a protein that's expressed in the body. That's something the body makes when there was some insult that required you to kind of adapt to some bad circumstance, like cholera.
Yep.
But what we now know is that the other main trigger for increasing zonulin is
gluten.
Gluten.
Yeah, gluten.
And I think that's a big factor. What would you say in terms of the sort of hierarchy of things that you see in autoimmune disease that are at the top? Is it gluten?
Gluten is definitely in the top 10, if not the top 5.
Yeah, it's
way up there.
Yeah, there's no one comes in with an inflammatory condition
of any type,
or any autoimmune disease of any type that doesn't get a full celiac panel workup, and not just a normal one you get from the doctor's office, which is TTG, which is barely ever positive, but a full panel of anti-gliadin antibodies, IgA, IgG, TTG, IgA, and IgG. These are really important to look at, and it's a lot of words and a lot of mumbo jumbo. We offer this testing at Function Health, which allows you to get access to your labs, and it gives you a really detailed view. It's something your doctor may not want to look at or order, but it's essential to know, because if you have any antibodies, and I learned this from Alessio, if you have any antibody level, even within the quote normal range, it means 1, you've been exposed to gluten, 2, you have somewhat of a leaky gut because it's gotten through, and 3, your immune system's pissed off to some degree about it. It may not be full-blown celiac, but there's something going on inflammatory-wise. And many of us can tolerate a little bit, but the amount of flour and gluten we have and the kind of gluten we have is very different. And I think that's
Western gluten.
Yeah, it's like the dwarf wheat, which is when they breed wheat plants, they breed plants not like humans, where you get 23 pairs of chromosomes, one for your mom and your dad. It would be like, instead of each person has 46, it would be like having 46 plus 46, which would be 92. If I'm good with the math.
Let's add that up, right?
And so all of a sudden you've got all these extra chromosomes, which means extra genes, which means extra proteins, which means sometimes different proteins than you're just getting, which is what is actually happening. So there's all these very inflammatory gliadin proteins now in wheat that we didn't even have 100 years ago.
Yes.
And so that may be part of it as well. And then they throw glyphosate on there when a lot of the wheat crops, they throw glyphosate to dry it out so they can harvest it easier. And that glyphosate is a microbiome killer. So then you're doing a double whammy. So do you think, to me, I think gluten is sort of like the gateway drug in a way. It's like, it causes the initial insult, damages the gut, But then we see all these other foods that people start reacting to, right?
Right.
So can you talk about like not just
cross-reactivity?
Yeah.
It's called bystander. It's a bystander intolerance.
Yeah. So
bystander effect.
This is not really well accepted by traditional medicine that there's these food sensitivities. They're not true allergies. They're not like a peanut allergy.
Well, it is showing up in the literature now. Yeah.
It is. It's a different part of your immune system, right?
Right.
It's kind of a slow reacting part as opposed to like a fast reacting part, like the guy told a story about with anaphylaxis with the fish smoke, the fish molecule.
Yeah.
But a lot of people start to have other foods that react to dairy and nightshades and nuts and other kinds of stuff that may be a healthy food, but actually they're reacting to. So how does that play a role in autoimmune disease?
Okay, so there's two things going on here. One is there's a concept called epitope spreading. Okay, that's a pretty important concept. So when you say your immune system is reacting to gluten or to gliadin, type of protein called prolamine, right? It's because there is recognition, like a lock and a key, of a certain sequence of amino acids, right? So your immune cells, your innate immune cells, they recognize that, and then again, they pass on that recognition to the acquired immune cells, and then they start making clones of themselves, right? And then they start making antibodies against tissue transglutaminase, etc. But then that damages tissue in the surrounding area. So if you make antibodies against tissue transglutaminase, which is an important enzyme, and you start damaging the tissue, say in the vicinity of the gut, now you get what Polly Matzinger, the famous immunologist, said, a dangerous stranger.
Yeah.
So you get a dangerous stranger, and suddenly other structures that maybe look a little bit like the gliadin, but not quite, they're close enough that the immune cells start going, well, maybe that's a bad guy too. Maybe that's a bad guy. Maybe that's a bad guy. So one example of this is not quite about the food thing, but I've seen patients that would get diagnosed with celiac disease, and I'd say, how's your thyroid? And they go, why are you asking about your thyroid? I don't have a thyroid problem. I've just got a gut problem, right?
Yeah.
I got a gut problem. Like, we need to check your thyroid.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have a thyroid problem. Okay, well, let's check your thyroid. So you do a TSH and a free two, and sure enough, they got antibodies against TPO.
Yeah, right? I would say it's about a third of my Hashimoto's patients, which is the most common, I think, autoimmune disease we have have some level of thyroid
problem.
Thyroid problem. They'll have gluten antibodies.
Have gluten. So it starts with the gluten, or maybe the other way around. I don't know. But typically what I would see is that patient that's got celiac, or maybe they didn't know they had celiac. They just had some weird symptoms. Maybe they had some joint aches or a weird rash. There's one called dermatitis herpetiformis.
Yeah.
Right. It looks like herpes. And then you check them for celiac antibodies, and they're positive.
That's right.
But then you've got to start checking for antibodies to other tissue.
Yeah.
So I saw one patient that started out with celiac, and then it spread to her thyroid. She got thyroiditis, and then she got multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
Right. So the question that gets raised is gluten the trigger for all those diseases, or is gluten causing leaky gut? And the leaky gut sets you up for all those diseases.
I think it's both.
Or is it both?
I think it's
or
both.
Is it both?
Yeah. I mean,
Dr. Fasano says both.
Yeah. I mean, I actually had a patient at Cleveland Clinic who had 3 autoimmune diseases, and they were
how was that possible?
treating all these different things. I'm like, has anybody checked your gluten antibodies? He's like, no. We checked it. He had full-blown celiac, like not.
And they hadn't even looked.
And then look.
Yeah.
And it's staggering to me because this is not something that's in some crazy alternative handbook of medicine. It's in the scientific literature.
It's right there.
National Library of Medicine. It's all the evidence points to this, and it's like a blind spot in traditional medicine, which makes me so frustrated because autoimmune disease is really a horrible condition. I mean, I can tell you when I was sick, because I had a long story. I had a root canal. Following the podcast before, I had a root canal. It went bad. I needed to take an antibiotic after I got my tooth because it was infected. I took clindamycin. I got C. difficile colitis. That didn't go away. The C. difficile went away, but it turned into full-blown ulcerative colitis. And I was taking.
And you didn't get a poop transplant at the time.
Well, I did not get a poop transplant. It's hard to, I was standing on the corner. Poop. Anybody got the poop? Want to share?
Yeah.
But I ended up being really sick, and I saw one of the top GI docs in IBD, inflammatory bowel disease at Harvard, and really nice guy. And he was looking at all kinds of actual alternative therapies and diet. And I tried everything I knew. Like I threw the kitchen sink at what I literally saved. I would say dozens of patients from having their colon removed, and I couldn't fix mine.
Yeah.
And I was like so sick. I took like 60 milligrams of prednisone first.
Oh, wow.
Didn't touch it.
Wow.
Didn't touch it. I was having 20 painful, bloody bowels a day. I was in bed. I lost 30 pounds.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was in bad shape. I was like near death.
Yeah.
And they were about to put me on one of those big heavy duty, TNF-alpha blockers or other drugs. And I was like, no, I'm going to do a Hail Mary here.
Yeah.
And I know I've got some massive inflammatory process going on. So I'm just going to basically do a bunch of stuff. Like I basically took a lot of IV nutrients, high dose vitamin C. I did IV ozone, which sounds crazy, but it's a powerful anti-infectious agent, immune modulator. And I did hyperbaric oxygen.
Okay.
And literally within days, it went away. In days.
Yeah.
So so and not all autoimmune is really simple, but I just remember how horrible it was to be in that state.
Yeah.
So many people are suffering, and they're taking so many of these drugs without actually getting to the root cause. And often it's sometimes simple. Like we've had cases where you just do one thing and it's gone.
Oh, the drug isn't really changing what's going on.
Or you just stop gluten and people get better.
Right.
Sometimes it's a little more complicated. You have to reset their gut microbiome. Like I had this one little girl, Isabel, who was 10 years old. She had a mixed connective tissue disorder. And she was on 1,200 milligrams IV of Solumedrol every 3 weeks, which is like a horse dose of a massive steroid. And she was on methotrexate, which is a chemo drug. And she was on a pile of other drugs to deal with the symptoms like nifedipine for Raynaud's and acid blockers for reflux and aspirin for the blood vessel clotting she had. So she was on a mess of things. And she had every autoantibody you can imagine. She had muscle enzymes that were high. She had high aldolase. She had high rheumatoid factor, high ANA, high anti-RNP. I mean, you name the antibody. And they were just like a little bit elevated, but they were like off the chart elevated. And we learned, by the way, in medicine, if those antibodies are high, you check them once and that's it.
Right. Why do you need to check them again?
Because they're going to have this for life.
Right.
Like they're going to have this disease for
Who cares if your ANA goes up or down or anything?
Right. And I think
you've got it.
I think it's important for everybody listening to understand that when you have an autoimmune disease, it's not a life sentence, even though traditional medicine says it's a life sentence. And when you get to the root causes, things that Bob and I are talking about, it literally can be undone, like it was with me. And this girl, I found out she loved the sugar and dairy. Mm-hmm. She loved tuna sushi. She ate a ton of it as a little girl. And when we did her lab, she was very low in vitamin D. She had high mercury. She had gluten antibodies. She had high calprotectin, which is a measure of inflammation in her gut, even though she had no gut symptoms. And we just basically put her on an elimination diet. I gave her a multivitamin, fish oil, vitamin D, and probiotics, and I got her eventually chelated with DMSA for heavy metals. And within 2 months, she was dramatically better. Within a year, she was off all her medications and had normal antibodies and was completely cured.
Right.
And I talked to her 10 years later, and she's fine. So, it just tells you that, what we're doing is so off base in traditional medicine. And we have to...
So downstream.
So downstream.
So the antibodies are downstream.
Right.
We're putting all our attention on the antibodies. So they're helpful diagnostically, right?
Yeah.
But the antibodies don't tell you about root cause. The root cause is in the innate immune system, right?
Yeah.
If the innate immune system is generating this problem, then the things you're changing with lifestyle, et cetera, have to do with getting your innate immune cells happy.
Yeah.
So I got to tell you, I have my UC story.
Yeah.
That's great because I had a patient that I had dealt with a couple of years and had bad ulcerative colitis. We got it reasonably under control, but not in remission. And then somebody told me about these 2 Israeli gastroenterologists that were doing research on an old compound in Chinese medicine called indigo.
Oh, yeah.
And they were combining indigo with curcumin. And I said, okay, we've done a lot of other things. You're a lot better. You're still not off your meds, though. I put this guy on indigo, and then I forgot about it, right? And then, I don't know, about a month later, I get his routine labs, and all of his markers were normal. And I called him up, and I said, I think they got the wrong blood. I think they got the wrong blood. Your C-reactive protein is normal. Yeah. That can't be. And he goes, I went into complete remission 2 weeks after starting this indigo. And
Wow.
Oh, so every now and then, and I'm not talking about magic bullets here, but every now and then you find something for that one person that really makes a difference.
Well, I think that's an important point, Bob, because people listening might go, I'm going to take indigo.
That's the one I want,
but
the
it's
indigo.
Actually,
it's that guy. It's that guy.
Everybody that everything works, right? So like I always say, if you know the name of the disease, you don't know what's wrong with you.
Right.
If you say I have ulcerative colitis, it doesn't mean you know what's going on.
Right.
It just means you know the symptoms.
I like to name and blame.
Yeah.
It makes me feel good.
Yeah. Well, that's right. That's what we learned.
You know what you used to say about neurologists? Diagnose and adios.
Yeah, treat them and treat them.
treat them, diagnose and adios.
No, it's right.
Right.
Yeah, but we really have a different model in functional medicine, and we take a look at all these factors, unpacking a little more. We talked about toxins. We talked about
foods.
We talked about
the microbiome
in the gut. We talked about certain food reactions. But there are also other microbes that are playing a role. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot now is the consequence of long COVID.
Yeah.
The autoimmune reaction.
Right.
And reactivation of other
signing
viruses.
off all those antibodies.
But we know in traditional medicine that many infections can cause autoimmunity. Lyme, Epstein-Barr. It's been linked to, for example, MS, Epstein-Barr.
Yep.
But long COVID now seems to be showing up with a lot of autoimmune antibodies, particularly to your autonomic nervous system, which is causing people to have POTS, which is orthostatic hypotension, where you get dizzy when you stand up or you can't stand for long periods.
Yep.
So there's a whole realm of infections that often are a cause.
Right.
And like
viral infections in particular, it seems like
viral and tick infections, I think.
Yeah, tick infections.
And tick infections, Lyme, Babesia, Barnell. And so, part of in functional medicine workup is looking for those things.
Yeah.
You don't have rheumatoid arthritis, you have Lyme disease.
Right.
But it happened to cause all these autoimmune antibodies.
Right.
So we got to really dig. The other thing I think is really important is sleep and stress. So those are really.
I thought you might bring that up. I don't know why. But
those are big factors, and they're
So it's the guy who never sleeps, right?
No, I sleep. Are you kidding? I'm in bed about 8.5 to 9 hours a night.
Yeah.
And so I think just because I wrote 19 books doesn't mean I don't sleep. But the immune modulation is really interesting with our stress response. So you might have a trigger like gluten or a toxin or some virus, but it doesn't really do anything until there's some triggering event, like a stressful event.
Right.
And I noticed, I saw this happen to me as well, and I see many of my patients, and so that trigger can be modulated. And I remember the work of, I think it's a Langer or I remember somebody else, but it was where they did journaling, just simple journaling about not just like what I did for today, and I went to the grocery store, but like your inner experience.
Yeah.
And 20 minutes a day, and they measured, hard outcome biomarkers for rheumatoid arthritis and for asthma.
Yeah.
And after I think it was like 12 weeks.
And it went down.
It went down.
Okay.
And they got better.
So we got to use that new iPhone app, right? Journal. It's just come out on the iPhone. So it's a plug for those. I don't work for Apple.
Okay.
Okay. So did you know that when you're really stressed, you release mitochondrial contents into your bloodstream?
No.
In huge quantities.
Wow. Tell me.
They've been shown when people go on stage, right, and they're stressed about being on stage, you can actually measure mitochondrial fragments in their bloodstream. Now, what are mitochondria? They're bacteria.
Wow.
Right? So it's essentially the same as if you had bacterial fragments in your bloodstream. So it causes this low-level endotoxemia. It's like metabolic endotoxemia.
So you're saying the body doesn't recognize mitochondria as self?
Oh, not at all.
Because
no, they got to be in the right compartment. If your mitochondria inside your cells, that's great.
Because they have different
But if your cells open up, right, they have different DNA. They have rickettsial DNA.
Your mother's DNA. Rickettsial DNA.
They have rickettsial DNA.
As a tick, kind of.
That's where mitochondria came from, is rickettsia.
Really? So rickettsia, for those who are not aware, is a really rare unusual infection that you can get out west, but it's where you live.
Rocky Mountain spotted fever or something like that. But mitochondria are made from rickettsia.
Wow.
And when you're stressed, you release that into your bloodstream, right? Your immune cells see that, and you may not go into septic shock, but they get activated, and you start making cytokines. So why bring that up? Because the hot drugs in rheumatology now are the biologics, right? Which go after cytokines like tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1. So I say, well, okay, you can take a drug that knocks out TNF alpha, or you can meditate and do heart math and Tai Chi and get more sleep. Think about it. Which one would you prefer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
And I'm not saying if somebody is really inflamed, I'm not going to tell them don't do the biologic. No, I'd never say that.
Yeah.
But, in the long run, is that
important
really
thing
a good
to manage?
idea?
It's important to manage. So your lifestyle, stress, relationships, sleep, all those things modulate your immune response.
Yeah.
So basically, high level, the way I think about it, like what are the things that are pissing off your immune system, right? It's toxins, allergens, microbes, stress, or diet, right? Trauma.
Yeah.
Right. And then psychological stress, physical stresses.
Yeah.
But there's also things we're missing, right? So we know, for example, that, you know, if you're like the Sid Baker model of what do you need to get to be healthy and what do you need to get rid of, you know, to actually be healthy, right?
Well, there is vitamin D.
Right. So vitamin, you mentioned that. So vitamin D.
There is omega-3 fatty acids, right?
And 80% are lower or deficient or just insufficient in vitamin D. Probably 90+% are insufficient or low in omega-3 fats in America. And this is an epidemic. And yet, you know, when you go to your rheumatologist or your gastroenterologist with an inflammatory bowel disease, they're not usually checking this stuff. So
why is this concept so hard?
It's not that hard.
Vitamin D. It's cheap. Right? It's really non-toxic. You have to take a lot of it to get sick from it. I mean, a lot. Over 10,000 units a day for a long period of time to get into toxic levels. And even then, you stop it and your calcium levels go down. So why is there so much resistance from rheumatologists, from endocrinologists, to just doing this simple thing? Michael Hogg's been talking about this forever with good science in the New England Journal of Medicine. And he's just like, hey, take vitamin D. Oh, no.
Yeah, right.
Oh, we can't do that.
We can take this $50,000 drug.
Right. This drug is only $5,000 a month IV, and it might give you tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Right?
But to avoid this vitamin that costs us pennies a day.
Don't take vitamin D. I mean, it could make you sick.
Right.
You could get toxic. And the press puts an article out about this like once a week.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. So there's sometimes like with MS, you know, for example, those who have low vitamin D are higher risk for MS. That's why it's at higher northern latitudes, so there's low vitamin D exposure to the sun, and so they get more vitamin D deficiency.
Yeah, and vitamin A is important too. I think like vitamin A has gotten a bad rap. Right? Oh, you can get toxic from it. It can cause osteoporosis, etc. But in reasonable quantities, regular vitamin A, you know, 10,000 units a day. It doesn't take a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about real vitamin A, not beta-carotene.
Yeah.
Because a significant percentage of the population doesn't convert beta-carotene into retinol, which is vitamin A. So a lot of people leave that out, but it induces immune tolerance.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan.
Yeah. So we can use nutrients when they're optimized to help regulate our immunity. We know that vitamin A and vitamin D and zinc and selenium and vitamin C all are part of our immune system.
Yeah.
Right? And help modulate things. So why not?
Immune cells are like any other cell in your body. They need a whole range of nutrients.
I want to sort of now talk about, so that we've covered the causes, how we begin to approach people and treat them. Because people are going, okay, I get it, now what? You know, what do I have to do diagnostically? What are the kind of options for me therapeutically so that I can reduce the level of inflammation, reduce my symptoms, feel better, deal with the cause, and actually maybe even reverse the problem?
Yeah.
And by the way, I just want to reemphasize, I said earlier, is that we were all trained in traditional medicine that it's a terminal illness. Like you got MS,
once you got it, you
got rheumatoid arthritis, you got lupus.
Jersey's welded to your back.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. And there's no way back. Maybe you can modify it, reduce it, it comes and goes, but it's a lifelong sentence.
Right.
In our experience, and I think in many functional medicine practitioners' experience, this is not the case. There are people who've had it and don't have it. Right? Who've completely recovered from it.
Right.
It might not be that they're still not predisposed to it if they don't take care of themselves, but that it's something that can be reversed. And the autoimmune antibody can be reversed. And again, it's something that we just don't see. So I just want to emphasize that.
So what they always ask is autoimmune disease reversible? And again, my response is, how far along is it? How much destruction of tissue is there? You know, I mean, particularly with a disease like rheumatoid arthritis, if your joints are gone, your joints are gone.
If your joints are gone, your joints are gone. But some things like, you know, ulcerative colitis, your gut can regenerate, right?
Complete regeneration.
Yeah.
I have seen people go into remission many times.
I had, my God, because I had a scope top and bottom at Harvard, full red gastritis all the way down, full colitis all the way through. It was just like a red carpet. Not the one you want to walk on. And it's all gone. It's 100% normal. My calprotectin was like 1,000. Now it's perfect, right? So I've experienced.
How often do we remake our bodies? Every 7 years for something, new cells?
And MS, you know, we have a colleague, Terry Walls.
Terry Walls.
Was in a wheelchair, and could not walk. And
I've gone dancing with her.
And now done dancing with her. She rides her bike 20 miles a day. and she's been able to reverse her MS using a functional medicine approach.
And something that Terry has said that's important, if you look at her brain scan, then you might say, well, I don't know if it's really gone away. So you're treating the brain scan or the person?
Well, the brain scan
right. Terry's moving around. I mean, she's got function.
Yeah.
But her brain scan shows scarring.
Yeah.
So
well, sometimes scarring you can't get rid of, right?
Right. The scarring you can't get rid of, but the brain can rewire itself around the scarring.
Exactly. So when someone comes to you and they have rheumatoid arthritis, or they have ulcerative colitis, or they have MS, how do you start to think about approaching a patient like that?
Yeah, well, I think I start focusing on anything that might be obvious, right? Do they smoke cigarettes, right?
You take a detailed history.
So I think, okay, so that's probably the most important thing that we teach in functional medicine.
Yeah.
Is you take the most detailed history you can imagine. You know, we have like a 10-page form that people fill out.
Where were you born? How long was it?
Where were you born? Were you breastfed?
Right. C-section.
Did you have colic when you were a kid? They're like, I'm 60 years old. You're asking me if I had colic? Right. You know, did you take antibiotics? Did you have otitis media when you were 6 months old?
Infections, right.
Like, I want to know about all these things. And, you know, that's really critical information. So the history is a huge...
I mean, did you eat tuna fish every day for 6 years? Right. I mean, I did. I had tuna fish sandwiches every day at lunch. You know, like, did you have exposure to other environmental chemicals?
You got to be careful. I mean, I had a patient with MS where I'm telling her, you got to eat more fish, right? So then she goes out and starts eating tuna every day. And I'm like, oh, I didn't you got to be very specific.
Right.
So I like to start really simple.
Yeah.
And we've talked about Sid Baker a couple of times. I trained with Sid 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, Sid's basic principle, what does a person need to get and what do they need to avoid? We've said that a few times, but you cannot stress that enough.
Yeah, that's the crux of how we
always start with that. Is there anything obvious that this person needs to get, you know? Maybe they just need to get more love.
Yeah.
Right? They're in a bad relationship. So I try to do the obvious stuff first.
Yeah.
And I'm making a point about this because sometimes people have the idea functional medicine is all about the grocery bag of supplements.
No.
Right?
Definitely not. Somebody
comes in, they've got rheumatoid arthritis or MS, then you just give them the grocery bag and they walk out with the cart. It's like, it's not like that at all. Now, it may evolve to that point. You know, they may end up on quite a few things if you start tweaking.
Yeah.
Right? They still don't take as many supplements as I do.
Right.
Right? Or you do.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a thinking. The problem is functional medicine corrects the thinking problem.
So I'm looking at the whole system.
Right.
So what's off in the system? So what's the outer layer? What's obviously off here? Is a person not getting, you know, the problems with lifestyle factors, not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, not getting enough fresh air, all those things. Really obvious, maybe to you and me.
Yeah.
But, you know, it wouldn't be obvious to a rheumatologist to say, well, get some houseplants, get an air purifier, clean up your gut. And then the next layer is going to be to talk about diet, you know, the gluten, the dairy, etc. Am I going to test for gluten sensitivity? There's a high likelihood that I will.
Yeah.
Am I going to do a gut microbiome test? Quite frequently I do.
Yeah.
You know, so I'll do the standard test, the blood count, the metabolic panel, the antibodies, basic immune stuff.
Do you look for toxins on everybody?
Not on everybody, no.
Heavy metals? I mean, if you have a history of someone's...
If I've got a history, if I have any reason to suspect it, I'll do it.
Like if you're a vegan and don't have fillings, you basically...
then I'm not going to do it.
You don't need to worry about it.
I don't do that.
But, I mean, if you've always been a vegan...
It's gotten hard to test for toxins, to be honest. You know, there used to be a few labs where you could do really comprehensive things, like look for glyphosate. Should I look for Roundup in everybody?
Yeah.
Well, everybody's got Roundup. I got it. I tested myself.
I know, me too.
It scared me. I'm like, what do I do? Well, maybe I just shouldn't test for this.
Don't eat at restaurants.
All right. Don't go out to eat. Don't drink anything out of a bottle. Then you'll be fine. So I don't do it unless there's a big red flag that says, okay, here's the person that, say, was well and they went out and sprayed their yard.
Yeah.
And they went downhill after that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking some kind of organophosphate.
You don't actually have to test for that. You know, I think I just want to emphasize what you said about history because it's so important. And I'm sure you've seen this because I've seen this in patient after patient. You take the history starting from birth.
Yeah.
Were you C-section?
Yeah.
Did you breastfeed? Did you have antibiotics from your own?
Yeah.
Did you have colic?
Yep.
Did you take antibiotics?
Yep.
And did you have acne and take antibiotics for that?
Yep.
Were you on the birth control pills again?
Yep.
So you start to get a story. Did you have irritable bowel when you were a kid?
Yep.
Did you have asthma? Did you have allergies? Did you have eczema? And you start to see they have this sort of low-grade inflammatory nonsense that starts to accumulate over their lifetime. And it sort of progresses. By the time you're in their 30s or 40s, it becomes autoimmune disease.
Yep.
And often it traces back to the gut and the damage that we've done to the gut through the diet, through the antibiotics, through lack of breastfeeding, through C-sections, through all of the ways we sort of deal with our toxic diet and all the environmental chemicals, which, by the way, all affect the gut. Yep. So I think your history point is really important.
Right.
And then I always make sure I check for, have you been exposed to tick infections? Did you have tick bites? Did you have mold in your house? Do you eat a lot of fish? What kind of fish? So I take a very detailed history.
Any flooding?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And then you got, okay, well, then you know where to find things. So what are the top diagnostics? You mentioned a celiac panel. You mentioned stool testing.
Yeah, I do a celiac panel. I do a stool test. Those are all pretty high up. I find a lot of weird immunodeficiency syndromes in people too. So IgA is probably one that people would never think about, right? But IgA, one of the standard immunoglobulins, so there's A, G, D, and E, right? But the A, people know that you make IgA in your spit and your tears, etc. And, it's present, but what's the problem if it's not there?
Yeah.
Very high incidence of autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And it's really common to see a congenital deficiency of IgA, but also an induced deficiency of IgA. So it's really worth testing for that a lot. So, I have a batter of immune tests. I do the CCP test, the cyclic citrullonated peptide test. I do that a lot. I do ANA, you should just do it.
Standard biomarker,
ANA should be a biomarker for everybody.
Yeah, we use that on the standard function panel, which your doctor's not going to do, but we check all these things. Vitamin D, we check for inflammation, we check rheumatoid factor, ANA, all those things that help people get a sense, and we're shockingly finding 30% of people have this phenomenon. And so in a way, people don't have to wait till they get an autoimmune disease. They can have pre-autoimmunity. And I want to get into that in a minute, but I want to kind of talk about, we talked about some of the diagnostics, and there's lots more. You can look for Lyme disease, you can look for tick infections, you can look for viruses, you can look for...
And there are labs that do standard panels.
Exactly.
Now that make it so much easier.
Exactly. And
do that. And certainly do a vitamin D level. Why don't I do
vitamin D level, you
and
can
omega-3 level.
Omega-3s.
Something I measure a lot is oxidized LDL.
Yeah.
Right? Which, Cleveland does it, Cleveland Heart Lab does it. And so it's a really easy test to do. And there are studies showing that when people live in polluted areas, their ox LDL goes up.
That's basically rancid fat.
It's rancid fat. It's probably the best, simplest marker there is out there.
Yeah.
So, I had a patient with MS recently, and she said, what kind of blood test do you want to do? I said, let's get an ox LDL. Why would you want to do that? Well, explain it to her. Makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah. EBV, is one that I would really single out. Like to do EBV panels quite a bit on people.
So basically, you're looking for toxins, allergens, microbes. You're looking for mold. You're looking for dietary nutritional deficiencies. You're basically doing that whole algorithm of what do you need to get rid of and what do you need to get. Right. And then once you get all that data, and it's really personalized. It's like you don't treat everybody who comes in with rheumatoid arthritis the same way, or everybody with lupus the same way, or everybody with colitis the same way. Everybody gets a different treatment depending on what their particularly unique characteristics of causes are, or imbalances are. Right. So where do you start with a patient in terms of the intervention? You mentioned diet a little bit, so maybe kind of take us through the thinking about the approach to treatment. Then some of these things people can do on their own. They don't even need a doctor for, but what are the things that you think are the most important?
A really simple thing is to have a person do a modified fast. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. Yeah. There's been a lot of protein powders that have been around for years, and especially somebody that's hurting. Yeah. Person with RA or a person with ulcerative colitis, they're having a lot of symptoms. Yeah. You rest their gut, you do it for 3 days, maybe 5 days, rest their gut and see if anything changes. Yeah. And the reason I like that is because it gets their attention.
Yeah. Right.
Because
you pull everything out and you just give them a non-allergenic protein drink.
Do this, a couple scoops of this powder 2 or 3 times a day, and 2 days later they go, whoa. Yeah. What's going on here? I feel different.
Yeah.
Right? It really gets their attention. And then you start working with diet in a really specific way.
That's interesting. It reminds me of a patient I had years ago. Her name was Judy. I don't remember her. She said she was listening to my advice because I said, I want you to be on a gluten-free diet, gluten-free diet. I want you to do this. It's like, I am. I'm not getting better. I'm like, okay, well, how about we just do 10 days of Ultra Clear Plus, which is basically a metagenic rice protein powder, which we used to use a lot. And it's hypoallergenic, and it's got nutrients in it, and basically you can live on.
Yeah.
Everything went away. 10 days. And then she got it. Yeah. And then she and then she lost 50 pounds.
I could have had a V8, right?
Yeah, her rheumatoid arthritis went away. So it's a very powerful strategy, and it's very inexpensive, and it's something that anybody can do.
Yeah.
You know, I think we'll put in the show notes some of the ways you can do a modified fast using some of these protein things. But I think you can't live on that forever. So
no. And I do want to add to that. There is a clinic out in California. I think there's a couple that actually do water fast for long periods of time, sometimes for weeks. I'm like, don't try this at home, right? They do this under supervision.
That's a risk.
But, you know, I'm an editor of a journal, and we publish some of their articles, and they've had some remarkable results.
Yeah.
And you go, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to be good for you. You're supposed to lose your muscles and all
food
this
is
stuff.
one of the causes of inflammation. If you have a leaky gut and you're eating foods that you're reacting to, then you're going to get better.
Yeah.
So there's a whole movement out there of elimination diets.
Right.
There's many different kinds.
Right.
There's the autoimmune paleo diet.
Right. AIP.
Yeah, which essentially is basically what
There's
I did.
nothing.
No, it's basically what I wrote in my 10-day detox diet book, which was essentially no grains, no beans, no dairy, no sugar, no processed food, protein, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and berries, lots of fat. And they remove also nightshades, they remove nuts, and they remove eggs.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty restrictive diet, but it's been shown in peer-reviewed journals to actually very effective for treating disease. And it's often where I'll start. And you know, some of the people say, well, just eliminate one thing, like just get rid of gluten and see how you do, or get rid of dairy. Like, no, because you don't know. You could have 5 different things you're reacting to, and if you take 4 of them away, you still react. You still have.
It's going to be a minimum of like 5 to 10 things.
Yeah, and that's the second rule of Sid Baker, which is the second tack rule. Is if you're standing on 2 tacks, taking one of them out doesn't make you 50% better. Right. So you've got to actually find all the things that are pissing your immune system off. So I tend to do more aggressive elimination diets and then add things back. But what do you think about things like an autoimmune paleo or the lectin-free diets? And is that something we should?
Well, that's a whole can of worms, right?
Just go inch deep on that.
I mean, so the AIP, I do use that in people. There is some published research on it.
Yeah.
So it's not totally made up. The thing I like about it is it basically just takes everything that might be a problem and says, okay, rather than trying to figure this out and sort through it, let's do it. Now, a lot of people just find it too restrictive. They can't do it. But at least they've been there. They've been down on that pathway, and they've said, okay, I've explored that. Let's liberalize just a little bit, right? But I think most people are sensitive to a relatively limited number of foods.
Yeah.
So that's just it. People get really confused about it, and they say, well, there are 30 things I'm reactive to. Like, most people don't have that many reactions unless they got leaky gut. In which case, you treat the leaky gut.
Right.
So go after that.
It's not what foods are you sensitive to, but why are you so sensitive?
Why are you so sensitive
and
to
fix that? And I think that's the next step, right? In the treatment. So you do the elimination diet, you find out these simple causes that you can fix, and then you have to fix the gut. I think it's the next step, right? Is that your next step?
To fix the gut.
That's like the first step after diet in terms of, and that's part of the diet is fixing the gut. Is how do you start with thinking about
go after the gut wall? Like use a lot of glutamine. I like N-acetylglucosamine, NAG. It's a great compound. It's been around forever. It comes from shrimp, from chitin. Right. So it's pretty safe to use. I've had a few people be allergic to it, but otherwise it's completely non-toxic. So I use that. I use zinc. I like curcumin. I mean, what can go wrong with curcumin, right? It does increase bile flow because, it's a choleritic compound. People will say, hey, my poo's a little bit greener, but you can live with that. So, there's some basic go-tos that I would use like that for the gut.
So there are supplements, but we have a whole protocol in functional medicine called the 5R program.
5R program.
Yeah, the 5R.
I don't necessarily do them in order.
Right.
I mean, I want to know what's going on in the gut microbiome. Right? So I might go after a particular bug first if I find it. But if I don't find a pathogen, I don't necessarily think the person needs to be on, some kind of potent antimicrobial.
No. But it's like basically the concept of take away the bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
This one's removed. So we've got bad foods you're reactive to. It could be bad bugs, bacterial overgrowth, yeast. Maybe it's a parasite, something, like Entomobacillus salitica, you might need to treat. And then
Then I go for the prebiotics, because I think prebiotics are onto that's the big thing that's really changed in our understanding of the gut.
Yeah, prebiotics.
Is getting really specific with prebiotics. I remember reading you posting something about Bob's potato flour, Bob's red mill potato flour, was that 10 years ago?
That's right, prebiotic starch.
I'm like, what? He's talking about potato starch? You got to be kidding me. Right, well, that data's pretty good, actually. And I know how everybody on it.
Yeah. That's right. I remember that. So there's prebiotics that are fertilizing the good bugs. So that's the second R is kind of
and that's a good long-term thing. That explains why when people do that smoothie thing for 3 days, the Akkermansia goes up and comes back down again. It's like, well, we really need to feed it for a long time.
Yeah, and one thing I think changed in my thinking a lot, Bob, was I understand prebiotic fibers.
Yes.
Polyphenols.
Yes.
Colorful plant compounds.
Yeah, matcha.
Yeah.
For,
Like when I had no Akkermansia, I took a lot of concentrated cranberry.
Yep.
Not like sugary cranberry juice, but cranberry concentrate, pomegranate concentrate, and green tea powder, and a lot of other polyphenol powders every day in a smoothie, and that's what actually reset my gut too.
Yep.
It was quite amazing. And so the replace is replacing things like prebiotics and polyphenols and
enzymes. Enzymes, which is an old naturopathic thing. I mean, I heard about this. I heard Bernard Jensen talk when I was in medical school, right? The old-time naturopath, and I thought, well, this guy's really obsessed with his bowels, right? It's like, that's all he wants to talk about. It's good bowel health, etc., using enzymes. And now it makes total sense. Well, I don't hear the gastroenterologist talking about digestive enzymes, right? You have exocrine pancreatic deficiency, and maybe you could take Creon or something like that.
You have cystic fibrosis or you're fine.
Or you're fine. Otherwise, everybody else is fine. Well, wait a minute. What about Beano? Is there a problem with Beano?
Wait until you were talking about farts, Bob.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. There's a reason I bring this up. It's because they did a study a few years ago I think it was in Italy, where the question is, are FODMAPs good for you or bad for you? So the fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols, right?
Yeah.
People eat these foods, they get gassy. Is that a problem for inflammation? So and if they are, should you avoid them? So a lot of people eat those foods, they get a lot of gas, they get bloating, they get SIBO or SIBO, whatever you want to call it. And so the assumption is, well, this is a bad thing, right? Well, this study that was done in Europe, they actually put people on a low FODMAP diet and then put other people on a Mediterranean diet with a lot of fiber. And they had them record the amount of gas that they gave them little clickers, right? And they recorded the gas. So, of course, the people in the Mediterranean diet just had lots and lots of gas. They
were eating beans?
They were eating beans, booms, all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Then they looked at their microbiome. The people in the low FODMAP diet, their microbiome went to hell.
Yeah, interesting.
What the hell? The people on the Mediterranean diet who were having all the gas and maybe a little discomfort, their microbiome had all the good stuff, the Akkermansia.
But I wonder if you have someone with really bad bacterial overgrowth and you give them FODMAPs, that makes them worse. So that's a
starter diet, right? It's just not a long-term diet, because we're talking about what diets, are you going to do for long-term for the gut to get the gut healthy. And a low FODMAP diet is not part of that. It's an elimination diet.
Right.
Because I want the person to know, well, I can't eat leeks, garlic, and onions. That's just a no-no for me. I can't eat that. But don't avoid all FODMAPs, because it turns out FODMAPs are prebiotics.
Right, exactly. Right. That's why they cause them,
That's why they cause the gas. And so here's this real trade-off. The person's got bloating, maybe they got SIBO, and they're saying, I should eat low FODMAP. Yeah, but that might kick off your autoimmune disease in the long run, because then you get dysbiosis.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a really important concept there.
So then we've sort of gone through that. And then the next step, right, which is reinoculate, which is probiotics.
Probiotics.
From when we started to now, it's become so much more sophisticated, sophisticated, our understanding. We thought we knew a lot. We know now we know so little, but we know enough. And there's a lot of data on probiotics.
We know probiotics make a difference.
Yeah.
Right? Some probiotics work for some people, some of the time.
Yeah.
really well some of the time.
Yeah, and then now there's Acromancy probiotics
Right.
that people can take. So it's interesting. When
I take them.
Yeah, when I was sick, I couldn't take them because they didn't even exist. But now they do. And then we mentioned like the repair part, which is a lot of things you were talking about, like zinc and glutamate, vitamin A, and fish oil, and other compounds. So we have a whole approach. We kind of reset the gut. And for me, in my practice, I know it's like for you, but when I do the dietary stuff and the resetting the gut, it often works for a lot of people. It's kind of the core.
88%, maybe 90% of people.
And then those who don't get better, I dig a little more. I look for Lyme, I look for heavy metals, I look for mold, I kind of like viruses, post-COVID. And we got questions from X, and we posted we were going to do this podcast with you, and everybody started kind of asking, okay, why not ask Bob about this and that? But we've kind of actually answered most of the questions around, long COVID and COVID causing autoimmunity, vaccines causing autoimmunity, environmental connections, and trauma from childhood. So we talked a lot about these things in the podcast. So I think we've covered a lot of it. I think, what I kind of want to leave people with is that this isn't just Bob and I being two quacks doing functional medicine for 30 years.
We've thought about this.
Notes. Bob, we're at the Integrative Health Symposium in New York City, and Bob just was on stage giving a tremendous lecture with an incredible amount of scientific evidence that backs this up. And what often frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates you, Bob, is in traditional medicine, there's enormous swaths of scientific evidence that is just ignored because it doesn't fit the current model of thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a rheumatologist. It says that I should be paying attention to toxins in poop, but I have no clue. I was never trained in this. I don't know how to look at a stool test. I don't know what to do if I find
And I don't have time.
I don't have time. I don't even know what to do. So it's like, I'm just going to do what I do. And I think it's unfortunate. And now there's more and more traditional doctors who are coming over to the other side and actually understanding this. Even at a high conceptual level, they get that things are changing. And I saw this at Clinic. Our rheumatologists there were so forward-thinking and were so progressive and really understood this. In fact, we did a retrospective analysis of some of our patients who had rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis in our clinic at Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. And we had a fellow from the rheumatology department, not one of us, but one of their fellows, analyze our data and their matched cohort data. And we outperformed them in terms of better improvement outcomes using functional medicine compared to the top rheumatologists. Not saying they're not amazing doctors, they are. They were using the best tools available, but they weren't dealing with the root causes, and they had the wrong map for the territory of illness that they were navigating. And I think that's what functional medicine is, a different map that we can use, and it can create profound changes. And as I'm talking, I remember this one case I had at Cleveland Clinic, a woman, she was like a 50-year-old business coach. She had everything. She was depressed, she had prediabetes, she was overweight, she had migraine headaches, she was severely affected by irritable bowel syndrome, bloating, and she had reflux. She also had psoriatic arthritis, so she had terrible psoriasis plus arthritis that went with it. She was on this drug that was like Celera, $50,000 a year drug, and she was on drugs for the psychiatrist, drugs from the GI doctor, drugs from the migraine doctor, drugs from the psychiatrist, like everything.
You're like polyphenols, not polypharmacy.
Holy cow. There you go. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see. What do all these problems you have in common? Depression is inflammation of the brain.
Yeah.
Obviously, reflux and irritable bowel are inflammatory gut diseases.
Yeah.
Migraines are inflammation.
Yeah.
Psoriasis is inflammation. Arthritis is inflammation.
Yeah.
Right? And so I just said, I think she's got and she was on tons of steroids in the past and antibiotics. I'm like, I'm just going to guess. But I think she has really bad SIBO, which is bacterial overgrowth, and dysbiosis, and she has yeast overgrowth. So I'm going to clear out her gut. Yeah. I'm going to give her some probiotics and some fish oil and vitamin D and put her on an elimination diet, and we'll see what happens. Yeah. I said, don't stop any of your medications. Come back and see me in 6 weeks. We'll go through the test and see what's going on. Comes back in 6 weeks. Says, well, I stopped all my medications. I lost 20 pounds. I don't have any more migraines. I'm not depressed. I don't have reflux. I don't have irritable bowel. And my psoriasis and arthritis went away. And I stopped all my medications. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's that easy. It's not always that easy. But the point is that we're often have the wrong map. And that's why I really was so excited about this conversation with you today, because it's just such a big issue for people. Autoimmune disease is the number one scourge for modern society. We think it's heart disease and diabetes, but it's actually it's autoimmune. It's so poorly addressed. I mean, we know that if you eat better and exercise, you can reverse diabetes. I mean, most doctors get that. It's not like a puzzle. But autoimmune disease is like a black box, and it really isn't. And we want to accelerate the adoption of the scientific knowledge that we have now. I mean, we've been doing this for 30 years, and we knew this 30 years ago. But it's like so slow, and it's frustrating, and so many people out there are frustrated. And I think people, need to understand that we have this opportunity to really rethink medicine, rethink disease, and particularly autoimmunity. So if you're suffering with autoimmune disease out there, I encourage you to check out this approach. Bob, where can they find more about you?
About me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, LinkedIn, the Institute for Functional Medicine.
What about your practice?
Actually not taking new people right now.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's
too busy.
His wife is jumping up and down.
This is like
Yeah, it's tough because, you're probably like me. When someone comes in, I have this and that, you go, oh, I know how to fix that in 5 minutes.
Right.
They've been seeing doctor after doctor.
Right. It's like,
But,
take some of this. Okay.
Yeah, but now there's the Institute for Functional Medicine. You can go find a practitioner.
Yeah. So I'm training the doctors, the next generation, so that they can serve the people that need it.
Yes, it's amazing. You've taught me so much over the years. You're just an incredible physician and a great asset to this whole field. And I think if people really understood what's possible, they wouldn't just passively accept that this is a chronic issue that they have to live with and manage, that this is actually treatable or reversible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Bob, thanks for being on the podcast. You're a superstar in my view, and great to have you as a friend and colleague for so many decades.
Pleasure, my friend.
All right, buddy.
Keep up with that Bob's Red Mill.
Is that your brand, Bob? All right, thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks.
If you loved that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.